SustAinimal, collaborative research on livestock for sustainable food systems. Dive into the groundbreaking work of Professor Sigrid, Agenäs, an expert in ruminant management and lactation biology from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, Sweden. Mark your calendars. 25th April 2025, 5:30 p.m. onwards. Don't miss this opportunity to learn how collaborative livestock research can transform sustainable food systems. Be part of the change. Be part of the future. See you there. Are you passionate about livestock sustainability and the future of food systems? Join us for episode 3 of the Pre-Symposium webinar series under the International Symposium on Agriculture and Environment 2025. SustAinimal, collaborative research on livestock for sustainable food systems. Dive into the groundbreaking work of Professor Sigrid, Agenäs, an expert in ruminant management and lactation biology from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, Sweden. Mark your calendars. 25th April 2025, 5:30 p.m. onwards. Don't miss this opportunity to learn how collaborative livestock research can transform sustainable food systems. Be part of the change. Be part of the future. See you there. Are you passionate about livestock sustainability and the future of food systems? Join us for episode 3 of the Pre-Symposium webinar series under the International Symposium on Agriculture and Environment 2025. SustAinimal, collaborative research on livestock for sustainable food systems. Dive into the groundbreaking work of Professor Sigrid, Agenäs, an expert in ruminant management and lactation biology from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, Sweden. Mark your calendars. 25th April 2025, 5:30 p.m. onwards. Don't miss this opportunity to learn how collaborative livestock research can transform sustainable food systems. Be part of the change. Be part of the future. See you there.
Hello everyone. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to today's Pre-Symposium webinar series organized as a part of the International Symposium on Agriculture and Environment, ISA 2025. So ISA 2025, hosted by the Faculty of Agriculture, University of Ruminants, Sri Lanka, is set to take place on 2nd September this year at the Gold Face Hotel, Colombo. So this year, we are excited to focus on the theme driving innovations in agriculture technologies for climate action and sustainability. So abstract submissions are still open and will be closed on April 30th, just 5 days left. So don't miss out. For more details, please visit our website. Okay, now let me extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Professor Sigrid Agenäs, who will be sharing her insights today on SustAinimal, a collaborative multi-actor research center studying the role of livestock for competitiveness and sustainability in the future food systems. Dear Professor, we are honored to have you with us today. And I would also like to warmly welcome Professor Dalsi Senaratne, our moderator for today's session, a renowned professor in the field of animal behavior and welfare, an experienced organizer of international events like ISAE. She currently serves as the head of the Department of Animal Science, Faculty of Agriculture, University of Ruhon, and was also the post coordinator of ISAE 2022. A heartfelt thank you to you all, our local and international participants who have joined us today. So we truly appreciate your presence and hope this session will both insightful and engaging. So without further delay, let's begin. So I am now inviting Professor Dalsi Senaratne to take over uh, as the moderator. So Professor Dalsi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshita. Good evening, everyone. Let me introduce the resource person of today's webinar, that is Professor Sigrid Agenäs. Professor Sigrid Agenäs is a distinguished expert in the management of ruminants with a particular emphasis on lactation biology at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences in Uppsala, Sweden. She serves as the director of the collaborative research center SustAinimal. that brings 20 partner organizations together to work on roles of livestock in future sustainable Swedish food systems. With a profound commitment to advancing animal welfare and applied animal science, Professor Sigrid leads pioneering research that bridges the gap between sustainable agricultural practices, animal production, and animal welfare. Her work aims to design future food systems with high sustainability regarding the environment, climate, animal welfare, farm economy, and rural living. Her work not only contributes to academic excellence, but also to practical solutions for the agricultural industry. In addition to her research, Professor Sigrid is actively involved in the scientific community. She has served on various committees and has been a member of the editorial boards of the Journal of Dairy Research and Translational Animal Science. Professor Sigrid holds a PhD in animal nutrition and management from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences and did her postdoctoral studies at the University of Cambridge. Her educational background and extensive experience mark her a leading figure in her field, dedicated to both academic excellence and practical solutions for the agricultural industry. With this brief introduction, I cordially invite Professor Sigrid to deliver the speech on SustAinimal collaborative research on livestock for sustainable food systems. It's over to you, Professor Sigrid.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm so pleased to be here. It's nice to be able to meet all of you online, even if I'm sure it would have been even greater to be able to go to Sri Lanka and meet you there. I'm very keen to share this talk with you, and I don't see the share button now. I'm so sorry. Why don't I see? Does someone need to put me in a chairman role? There it is. Good.
Now you can share.
Yes, I can share now. Do you now see my screen as you should?
Yes, we can see.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to talk to you about something that I spend about 30% of my work time on, which is SustAinimal, a knowledge center for the role of food production animals in future Swedish food systems. And my role is as director of this organization, but I have around 60 active co-workers who also contribute to the daily work. And it has a very strict Swedish emphasis. So I think we need to start with just agreeing on where in the world Sweden is. So let's zoom out a bit. Sweden is located between Norway, Finland, and Denmark in Scandinavia. So this is Sweden. You see, it's a fairly long country, and the total area of Sweden is 41 million hectares. It's not very densely populated. We are around 10 million people living in Sweden. It's a country with a high degree of industrialization and a generally high living standard for people. And Sweden is interactive in world trade with all parts of the world. And currently, 50% of the value of what we eat and drink is imported. We also have exports, but there is still a net import of food to Sweden. And that is the result of a long time of policy where free trade within the European Union has been a driving force. And then with free trade, commodities that require a lot of labor, such as food, will be cheaper produced in countries with a lower economic standard because of the high level of salaries. Even the low salaries are fairly high in Sweden. And this means that work where there's a lot of labor involved will be cheaper in other countries. And then when you have free trade without any protection at the border, it will be tempting both for large companies that process food and for households to buy food from a cheaper origin than that produced in Sweden. So with free trade and the general cost in Sweden, it's very easy to explain why we have a large food import. However, a few years ago, our government launched a food strategy for Sweden, and that's the first food strategy in Sweden since I was born. It hasn't been a big topic on the agenda. Sweden has been blessed to act in peace for more than 200 years. And it's 150 years ago since we had a main starvation situation. And when you have generations of people who live in cities and can buy whatever food they need, the issues of food become a fairly low priority. So this all has put us to this point where we import half of the value of the food we eat. I'm not saying half of the food, because a lot of the stock foods like potato and wheat are produced in Sweden, but we import. In the import, we also have some high value products like beef from South America. So it's more than half of what we eat that is produced in Sweden, but it's still a high dependency on import, both of food and of everything needed to produce food. So this was noted by the government, and they agreed. It was a broad political agreement to launch a food strategy that says that the food industry or food sector should employ more people, and we should produce more food with maintained respect to the environment and maintained or improved animal welfare. And linked to this strategy, there was also a research agenda that you can find. If any of you work with research policies, you might appreciate having a look in it. And when these two documents were launched, there was also research money set aside to help realize this food strategy. And we have a governmental research body called Formas, who launched a call for collaborative research centers for competitiveness and sustainability in the food system. And the group that I live in that I work in was asked to put together one initiative for this call. And from our university, there were 17 initiatives. And then in the final round, when all the other universities also came in with their applications, there were around 15 national suggestions, and 4 of us got funded. And we have now had money for 5, we're on our 5th year. So for the years 2020 to 2024, we got 48 million krona, which is around $4.8 million or euro. And we then had to have 15% in addition to that in co-funding from industrial partners. And now we're in our second funding period for the years 2025 to 2028. And now we could apply for a slightly lower amount, 40 million Swedish krona. And we had to show at least 30% of co-funding from the industry. And the industry partners involved in, or the partners involved in SustAinimal, their logos are shown on this slide. SLU is the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences where I work. This is the Swedish Veterinary Agency, And we have 2 other universities, Linköping and Dalarna. We also have a research institute, RISE, that have a large role in SustAinimal. And then we have some of the organizations that handle and sell knowledge to farming. And those are a very old society for economy and householding. They've been around for 400 years. It is the Swedish milk recording system and all the advisors for nutrition and fertility for dairy farmers. And people who do nutrition and breeding and biosecurity for farms. We also have the Swedish Farmers Union that organize all the Swedish farmers, and then some companies that buy and sell the products from the farms. So we have, you may have heard of the dairy company Arla, another dairy company called Normerier, and we have a meat company, and this organization that promote sales of chicken and of eggs. So these are very different type of actors. We call it a triple helix because we have academia and the farmers' companies, and then organizations that promote implementation of knowledge. We don't see things the same way. When we started working on this and needed to find an angle that we could all agree on, we had a lot of discussions already when we outlined the program. And what we agreed on was to go in with an application on agricultural land as a basic resource for food production, and to discuss the role of animals in food systems and link the role of animals to the agricultural land. And I know that many of you work in agriculture and the effects of agriculture on the environment. So for you and for myself, this is a very obvious angle. But at the time when this call was launched, there was a strong interest across Europe in food tech, where people come up with really exciting new innovations. For example, hydroponic production of lettuce inside in parking houses, or some gadgets that can improve a small part of a specific crop, for example. And these food tech innovations gain a lot of media attention, and they attract risk capital, risk investors, and use a lot of the discussion room. And as an animal scientist with agriculture background, that was imbalanced to me, that we spent so much time and money on these new innovations, but nowhere near the same amount on improving and supporting the bulk of our food system. So we wanted to really bring attention to mainstream farming and what we can do with that if we are going to increase the Swedish food production. And so we agreed on this. This is an important angle. And we also agreed that we need to look at both the deliveries from animals in the food system, but also the loads. So we wanted to bring these factors to the same discussion, and bear with me, I think it's going to be clear for you in a short while. To start with, we wanted to describe the role of animals for net food output from Swedish agricultural land. And this is an aspect that is almost never discussed in Europe and North America, because the food systems produce sufficiently for the populations, and sort of research questions that are prioritized have been those that handle negative loads. So for the Swedish food system, for example, it's been leakage of plant nutrients into the Baltic Sea that has caused a lot of oxygen deficiency and death of the sea. So that's a big societal problem that is linked to agriculture. So then there's been research money how to handle that problem, but the problems haven't been discussed together with the net food output. So we wanted to bring that in, and especially since this food strategy says that we're going to increase food production, so we need a higher food output from agricultural land. And then, of course, as I'm sure you're aware, one can say that animals is an efficient way of using agricultural land. You can feed more people if you grow a human edible crop on the land than if you grow something that animals eat. And I'm going to come back to that. So net food output is important for us. Competitiveness in the sense that the possibility to run profitable businesses in all parts of the food system, including primary production. And with competitiveness, we mean a company that makes a profit where the people who own it can get a salary from the company, and that the company manages over time. So even if things change and there's a difficult year, maybe the company can still survive it. But the role of animals for biodiversity is a big thing in Sweden. When we discuss biodiversity and animals globally, animals are often put in the context of damaging biodiversity. But for the Swedish landscape, grazing animals are crucial to maintain the biodiversity in the cropping landscape. And this is actually the factor that has been most easy to agree on. It's slightly linked to the attractiveness of the landscape. We have a very small urban population, and in order to have a successful agriculture, we need more people than the farmers to live in the rural areas. And those who don't live there need to be interested in visiting and maybe spending holiday or making days out in the landscape. And agriculture is forming how the landscape looks, and the experience of going to the countryside will be affected by the farming methods. So that's also a value coming out, where we say that it's particularly linked to the animals, because areas that are grazed by animals are often seen as very attractive to people because of the biodiversity and openness that they form. We also need to look into the role of animals for circulation of plant nutrients, both circulation and leakage. The possibility for animal feed crops to deposit carbon into the ground. That's an important aspect for us when we discuss the role of livestock in the food system, and the combined effects of animals on soil fertility. But we also need to look into the addition of greenhouse gases to the global situation from farm animals. There are challenges around animal ethics. We need to take the discussion of what are we allowed to do to animals? Why can we do certain things to them? What is accepted today and what will be accepted 20 years from now? And that is also linked to the social sustainability of farming. Because if society doesn't trust the farmers or don't agree with farming methods, the societal contract with the farmers to produce the food will be damaged. And we see quite a lot of this, both in Europe and North America, with citizens who very strongly criticize farming methods that are to do with farm animals. When we were working on the application, we tried hard to find all the good selling points for our initiative. And we were sat in the summer of 2020 and said, should we also say something in the application about war and crisis? Or is that a bit over the top? And one of our partners, the Swedish Veterinary Agency, has a well-defined responsibility for preparedness in animal farming. So with that as support, we said, okay, we'll put that in. We need, at least people will read the application text. And we will say that animals can have a very strong role for delivering food in a crisis situation. So we put that in also, both resilience and preparedness. And then, as you know, those have been very big topics. And when I get invitations to talk about SustAinimal, it is very often linked to preparedness. Now with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, these countries are very close to us. So the general awareness of that we may end up in some kind of geopolitical crisis has increased a lot since we drafted SustAinimal. So these are the questions that we want to discuss, and we want for something to be a sustainable discussion, we need to bring in more than one perspective into that discussion. And if you remember all the different partner organizations and then think of all the individuals who work in those partner organizations and all of these sustainability factors, I think it's easy to imagine that we don't agree on all of these factors. There are individuals in SustAinimal who see the most sustainable future for Swedish farming with fewer animals, and there are those who only see an increase in dairy cows as a possible road for increased food production. So we don't agree. What we did with SustAinimal is to bring that discussion to work. So we can discuss this during work hours instead of doing it on X or Snapchat or as debate pieces in media, which very rarely leads to any kind of solution. It only leads to further positioning. So that was a big goal for us to increase the ability in all of us working in this food system in Sweden, both in the overhead and at the farm level, for discussing these challenging questions and to do it in a professional way, to discuss in order to learn more and come up with solutions or identify bottlenecks. And I'm really proud to say that we've done that really well. So now, if we have a big discussion, I hear people say, oh, what you just said, I never thought of that. And I don't think I understand what you mean. Can you please explain more? And that's a very open and inviting way to respond when someone says something you don't necessarily immediately agree with. And this has made it possible to have really good discussions, and we learn so much. I've never learned as much per year as I've done during these years with SustAinimal. So now we're going to go back again to Sweden. You remember it's positioned close to the North Pole in the north of Europe. And I said we have 41 million hectares of land in total. This use of the Swedish land is quite different from many other countries. 68% of the Swedish landmass is used for forestry, and around 85% of that is cultivated forest with a production plan where timber is cut regularly, and 15% is some kind of a natural untouched forest with a higher biodiversity and more wild forest. It's only 7% that is agriculture, 7 or 8%, depending on how you define different types of land. This is much less than the global average. Does anyone in the audience know how much agriculture land we have on the globe totally? You can put it in the chat if you know. — I'm now going to assume that some of you know, but you don't find the chat function. It's 37.5% of the globe land mass that is used for agriculture. So, and then some countries have much more. France, for example, has 50% agriculture land, and some have much less, like Sweden, with only 7%. And I think it's good to know in your own country how the land use is laid out compared to the global average and to your neighboring countries, for example. The only country in the world with a higher proportion of forestry than Sweden has is our neighbor country, Finland, who have like 73% forestry. But we are two very forest-covered countries. And then now we're going to go into detail with the agriculture land. So I'm going to show you the use of Swedish agriculture land, a typical cropping year, and the exact data in this graph comes from the cropping year of 2019. You see two green pie pieces, and this is the land that is used for permanent pastures. So this pale green piece is always pasture, and the only way for that to be included in the food system is by animals grazing the pasture. Among this land, we have semi-natural grasslands with very high biodiversity that couldn't be cropped. The way that land looks, you cannot go there with any kind of cropping interventions. While this part, it's also green, and that is home for lay crops that either is animals grazing on arable land or harvesting of grass and legumes as a winter feed for the animals. Sweden has a very distinct 4-season annuality. We have spring now, sun is coming out, and the grass has just started growing. And then we have a summer with many daylight hours because the night is very short in the Nordic countries in the summer. But then we get a long winter with short daylight, maybe only a few hours per day, and freezing degrees. So the only time of year that animals can be out and find food outside is during the summer. So if we want animals on the permanent pastures, we need to also grow feed for them and harvest as winter feed. And as you see, out of all of the Swedish agriculture land, these two pieces they make up more than 50%. On the rest of the land, we grow wheat and other cereals, some rapeseed, potato, sugar and legumes, and some of the land is always put in a rest as fallow land. All of this is used for animal feed, and quite a large part of the other crops also end up as animal feed, either because they were destined as animal feed to begin with, maybe because that farmland is not fertile enough to give a good crop of wheat that you can use for baking bread, or because you planted the wheat with the intention of harvesting it for bread making, but it was a bad cropping year or something went wrong with that specific field. So the quality isn't good enough for the milling industry. And then you have all this wheat that doesn't have a market as food for humans, but it can then be channeled as food for animals instead. Anyway, when we add all of this up, on average over time, around 70 to 75, and maybe even more some years, of the crop volume from Swedish arable land end up as some kind of an animal feed. And if you are a person coming into the food system from a human nutrition perspective or from a global aid or environmental movement or anything else, this of course stands out. It can, and I fully understand that, it can look as a waste of arable land. Why are we using all of this for animals? So we need to be able to explain that. And if we can't explain it, it's probably not done right. And we definitely need to investigate, can we replace some of these crops with something that will feed more people? Because if we can do that, we shouldn't increase the numbers of animals. Maybe we should decrease it. But if it instead is the situation that a lot of the farmland doesn't give a good home for a food crop, then maybe we should increase animal farming if we want to increase total food production. So I'm going to show you now a couple of pictures that show the semi-natural grassland, which is in this pale green part of the pie. So this is a very typical semi-natural grassland in Sweden. These are dairy heifers on pasture for the summer. And this area is the semi-natural grassland. As you see, with the trees and the large rocks and the slight hill and density of bushes, you can't grow tomatoes or wheat or potato here. It doesn't work. You can't work this land with a tractor. Back in the days, maybe 100 years ago, this piece was probably used for cropping of animal winter feed. While today, this paddock or a field that the animals have access to even includes some arable land. In the background here, you see this patch is probably a farm field, arable land, where you could go with a tractor. But maybe this farm is remote, it's far away from other farms, and the person who owns it can't make a living on the farming only. So they have a job, and then they try and make sure that the land is used somehow. Because we don't have a shortage of arable land in Sweden. Instead, we're losing every year. People are abandoning agricultural land and planting it with forest, or it becomes part of a city or roads or something else. So there is a movement where people who own farmland try as long as they can to maintain that land in farming, even if it means that animals are grazing it instead of them cropping it. This is another picture of a similar situation. The land closest to the camera is semi-natural grassland, and it has been grazed by animals since it rose from the ice sea after the ice age. So during the ice age, all of what you see now was pressed down by the ice, and when the ice slowly thawed, there was a sea forming, a cold sea, and with time, land started rising again from the compression of the ice. And when land came up out of this sea, people moved into Scandinavia from Central and Southern Europe, and they brought animals already. So with every piece of land that appeared from the sea, that was used for grazing animals or for cropping. So this has never been anything other than pasture. So for a couple of thousand years, it's been grazed. And the microdiversity in this land, you see there is a difference in height. There's a difference in sun and shade. There are stones and trees. And there are different directions, like maybe this is to the south and we are standing to the north. When you add animals here who step on some of the green, they eat some, they defecate and they urinate. They lie down and they stand up, and some areas they don't touch. This results in many, many microbiotopes. So within each square meter, the biodiversity here is as high as a square meter land in the rainforest, although the rainforest as a whole has more species than what the Swedish semi-natural grassland has. But in Sweden, the species that are endangered to be extinct, almost all of them are found in the semi-natural grasslands. And over the last 100 years, we have lost about 2 million hectares of this land, and we now have around 300,000 hectares of this left. And this land is, I mean, the biodiversity has a value of its own, for sure. Each species has a value just for being. But it's also very crucial for agriculture because this land is home to pollinators. So if I wanted to use the arable land here to grow maybe rapeseed, I need all of those rapeseed flowers to be pollinated in order to get the seed. And the pollinators need this land for their existence. So in the farmland, it's also important to have these islands of semi-natural grassland. And this is one of the qualities of animals in the food system that we have tried to explain and share with as many as possible in SustAinimal. And then when you come up with a grazing system, sometimes the patches of semi-natural grassland are too small to make a rational farming situation. So sometimes then you include also arable land in the pasture areas. But on this arable land in the dotted line in the back of the picture, you can also harvest grass and legumes for winter feed. And this is what a large part of the Swedish arable land is used for. So we are now in the dark green pie piece with the cropping of silage. And you remember that I said we wanted to include preparedness and resilience as factors in SustAinimal. And I even say that when we have all the cuts of silage harvested, depending on where in Sweden you are, you get maybe 2, 3, or even 5 cuts. When that is harvested and it's in silage, that is one of our strongest preparedness factors, because then we know that dairy farming has the main input for the rest of the year, and that we will get milk and beef. But lay on arable land can also be used as a grazing area. These are high-yielding dairy cows that have access to outdoors, so they can go into the barn if they like, then they can be outside if they like. We are a fairly cool country, so most of the days in the summer, the cows enjoy being outside. But when temperatures rise about, well, over 25 degrees Celsius, the black cows will find the shade, which they usually find in the barn, and soon thereafter the brown cows also need to go in to avoid heat stress, because these are fairly high-yielding cows, maybe 11,000 kilo ECM per year, so they have a very high energy turnover, and thereby also a lot of excess heat produced in their own bodies. So then with some sunshine, and if there is not a good breeze, it gets really warm for them outside. So I've now shown you what type of the distribution of how we use our agriculture land, and I'm now going to move into looking at the differences across Sweden. So this is a map of Sweden showing the distribution of agriculture land, where the darkest spots are areas that have a high proportion of agriculture land. So in the far south, around 50% of the land is agriculture land, just as in France. And here is an island that is almost all of that is agriculture land. But the further north you get, the lower the proportion of agriculture land. So this is basically, all of this is forestry. And large parts here are also forestry. And it's not only unevenly distributed, it's also unevenly productive. And this is data put together by a PhD student called Raphael Remeau. It's a really interesting publication, and I hope many other countries will mimic that and do similar publications on their production data. So she has used national records of crops, and based on that, divided all Swedish farmland into different productivity zones. So in zone 1 here, the yellow one, on a normal cropping year, 62% of the land will be used for cereals, 11% for oilseeds, Some will be for legumes and sugar beet and potato, and only 9% will have a lay crop. And this is the land, I think, where we have the best possibilities to grow more food for people with high value food crops. But if you look at the Swedish map, the pale yellow is only found in a coastal area in the south and then on a patch here. The rest of the land has a much higher proportion of lay on the land. So much that in the dark red, it's 67% of the arable land that houses a lay crop every year. And here they've only included farmland that is in a crop rotation. So if anyone has put a permanent lay on their farm, that land is not included in this analysis. So the land that you see here is in crop rotation, where in the yellow part you can rotate between cereals and oilseeds and legumes, sugar beet and potato, and then only have lay every now and again. While in the dark red parts of Sweden, you have lay almost all the time, and then when you break the lay, you have 1 or 2 years of cereal grains, probably predestined as animal feed, and then you go back to a lay, because that is what the land soil fertility and the climate and weather can house. On this land, if you take the chance of putting out oilseed, for example, there's a very small chance that you will get a harvest. So that economic risk is too much for the farming company to carry. So if you're a farmer, you need to plan your cropping in a way that you will be fairly sure to get an harvest. Because of these differences over Sweden, we put up some living labs and with focus on different parts of Sweden as examples. So for us, a living lab is a multi-actor approach for co-creation of knowledge and for identifying knowledge gaps. We have a national policy living lab where we meet politicians and other decision makers. We have a farm management living lab where we discuss things like biosecurity or how you plan your crop rotation. And we have 4 grazing living labs. And when we go to a meeting in a grazing living lab, it can look like this. Now you know everything about Swedish farming now. So now you see that this is a semi-natural grassland. This is actually a field that Carl von Linnaeus, the man who named the species, often walked in the 18th century with his students. So he has described this land in his books. And here you see a day in the grazing living lab where farmers and landowners, animal owners, people from animal rights movements, and people who sell meat and milk, and people who are responsible for national nutrition and health of the public, we all meet and then we discuss the use of this land. And we're out in the land discussing it, which makes the discussion completely different than if you're in an office in a city. And we have these grazing living labs in 4 regions of Sweden. So the south, the west, the east, and the north, just to be sure that we describe the regional differences, because they are very different. You know that now. You see that they have different productivity of the land, and there's also many other differences between different areas. And that's the same, I think, in most countries in the world, that the whole country is not the same. In the northern node, we have 12 farms in the grazing living lab, and they collect data, they try different farming methods, and they host a lot of visits and study tours so that we get people to visit the farms and we can show them, for example, how the countryside changes when you have grazing animals or when grazing stops and there is forest everywhere. And one of the outputs from SustAinimal's first 4 years was a scientific paper on possibilities for dairy production in the north of Sweden and the different future food scenarios. And if you're into this with trying to plan future food production, I think you may find this paper interesting. Even if the data is very different from the country that you work in, you can look at our approach. So I highly recommend this paper. We also have an academy of young scientists, postdocs and PhD students. And they all have different speciality, but together they make up and cover the whole field of SustAinimal. We have Marcos Managos, for example, who works with greenhouse gases and carbon footprint from the feed to dairy cows. Fatima El Kosht is a crop scientist. She works with the role of ley in crop rotation, both effects on the following crop yield, but also the role in carbon sequestration. Melania Angelotti works with red algae as a feed additive to decrease methane emissions from ruminants. Harold Ottenbosch, he's from Belgium originally, and he works with farmers' willingness to adopt new practices. And that's super important, of course, because if farmers don't adopt, then it doesn't matter if we came up with a great strategy. And this is an example of Harold's publications that I also think you might find interesting to have a look at how it's laid out and what methods they've used. We've also invented something we call the roundabout process, which is a way to harbor these very varied discussions on different perspectives. And we used a roundabout in England as the sort of mental idea for this process. It's called the Swindon Magic Roundabout. And if you've never heard of that, you can easily Google it after my talk and you will find footage. It's a roundabout where every entry and exit to the roundabout has a mini roundabout. So traffic is moving in all these directions that the red arrows show. And we thought we'll use this as the image. And then in the center, we put the knowledge area around competitiveness and economy. And then each of the other mini roundabouts are different sustainability measures. So it's greenhouse gases or biodiversity or something else for animal welfare. And then the hubs of specialists that contribute to SustAinimal, they all work within one mini roundabout, or maybe they cover two. And then we have meetings where we do very quick check-ins, where people can raise what data they are working on, what their bottlenecks are, and we can find ways for them to move forward in the roundabout. So the roads to and from will be inputs into the farming system and products or values coming out from the farming system. And this has been a way to hold very short, like 1 hour a month meetings with the different research groups where they all come together and give us short updates of their methods. And after each roundabout process, there's always been someone saying, oh, wow, I didn't think about that. Now that I know these aspects, I see that my data that I planned for one publication can actually produce 3 publications, or they invite each other as co-authors and they see really where they can help each other out. 1 hour a month, each mini roundabout gets to present for 10 or 20 minutes. And they give short updates, and then we wrap up with bullet pointing the needs that the different mini roundabouts have. And we record these sessions to allow someone else to do research on how we interact. A few finishing pictures. This is grazing on a high-yielding dairy farm during the summer drought. It doesn't look very nice for these high-yielding cows, but grass has a very high inbuilt flexibility and preparedness because it comes back When rain comes back, grass starts growing again, where an arable crop, an annual crop on this land would have died, and then you would need to sow it again. So we also have identified this, that people need to know that grass is magic and it's flexible. We talk about the net food output. So this particular piece of land, how much food can we get from it if we grow human edible food crops, or if we have animals grazing, or we harvest it as animal food? What is the net food output from each piece of land? Would the land have had an alternative use? Could we have used it better? What are the effects at the systems level, both immediately and over time? Most of the life cycle analyses that are used in agriculture assume that soil fertility is a constant and will never change. But we know that that's not true. If we grow a lot of ley, you will increase the carbon content and thereby the fertility of the soil. So if you stop using ley in the crop production, the fertility of the soil will go down. And with this knowledge, we should be able to make decisions of where and when we should grow and graze grass on arable land, and when the land should be used for a food crop. We work with possibilities to use virtual fences available to Swedish farmers. It's a technology used in other countries, but it's not yet legal in Sweden. So we have had one PhD project on that. We have also started a new landscape experiment that is funded by the Kamprad family, and that is the family who owns the IKEA furniture company. And this is a landscape experiment where we're going to try 2 different grazing strategies on semi-natural grassland, using the virtual fences to control which parts of these areas that the animals can more, and maybe some parts shouldn't be grazed at all for a while. We're also going to quantify how far away from the semi-natural grassland we can find pollinators on the arable land. And if you're interested in this, you can find more information at slu.se/blandskap. We also have 4 different crop rotations on arable land in this experiment. So we have, this is our dairy farm, and identified 5 different plots of land. Each of the plots is split into 4 subplots, and the plots will have different crop rotation. And those crop rotations will be with or without ley, with or without grazing on that ley. Some of the plots are land that hasn't had a ley crop for at least 12 years, and some have only had ley crops for the last 12 years. And this experiment is starting now. We have just put out all the seeds, and animals will be turned out on the 10th of May. Very quickly, I want to mention some of the success factors in SustAinimal, and the number 1 is co-creation. People from the whole food system, from all parts of primary production and academia and whatever, are invited to the discussion already when we identify research questions and choose methods. We have double leadership in all positions in SustAinimal. So I'm the director. I work at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. The co-director is a man called Per Pets Nielsen, and he works at the Research Institutes of Sweden. So on each position in SustAinimal, we have double leadership, and with double, we mean that it's either people from different organizations or from different expertise. So it can be a soil scientist and an economist, or an animal scientist and a soil scientist. And that is to ensure that more than one perspective is included already early in a process. We really try to support and strengthen the multidisciplinarity, and the roundabout process is one of the successful examples. And we try to ask, please explain, instead of saying you are wrong. And that makes a big difference in the tone of the discussion. My last slide is that we have agreed that the most sustainable solution for agriculture is decided by local conditions. And by that, we want to say that there is no global solution for what farming should look like, because there is no one farm on the globe that is representative of the whole globe. So we need to develop methods to explain the qualities and challenges on each specific farm, and then choose a farming method that uses that land at the best possible way. And we're really keen to hear from people all over the world. So please send us an email if you have questions or suggestions, or just want to discuss something. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sigrid, for your very interesting presentation. Actually, you could bring all of us for a certain time period to your country. So
yes, that would be lovely.
Yeah, so now it's time for the plenary discussion. The audience, the participants, you are requested to either you can raise your hand and ask a few questions, or you can drop your question in the chat box or Q&A box.
And if you don't have questions for me, I will have questions for you.
Actually, Professor Sigrid, from my end, I will raise a few questions. I'm very happy to see you, and good to know that my specialized field, also animal behavior and welfare, you are working on that. So just few questions.
Yes.
So how does SustAinimal approach the complexities of the food systems to find sustainable solutions?
Yes, that is a very good question. And of course, there is, when we come to the research projects, there is no one research project that can cover all of this. But we try to make them linked to each other. So for example, we have the one student who's working on feed additives for reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And then another student who is working on how much greenhouse gases that are produced when we make the feed for the animals. And then someone else is working on which cropping systems that are most economically stable for the farm over time. And then when we bring these students and projects together, the total output will be more than just the separate small project. So we try to catch a lot of the understanding that is produced in the gap between the individual research projects. But then, of course, we also need the specific within one scientific discipline knowledge to solve specific questions. There you are again. And one example of a project that relates to animal welfare is one where we are investigating how to water the animals in a situation of a severe drought or a power shortage where we don't get water from the wells. And we have the Baltic Sea along half of the Swedish coastline, which is brackish water. So we have had very controlled experiments with dairy cows who've been offered brackish water at different saline content. And then we follow both physiological and behavioral markers to see if this is a problem to the cow, or if even the intensively bred Holstein cows can adjust and start saving water through their physiology. And we've also tested the Swedish animal welfare regulation says that the animals must have access to fresh water 24 hours a day. And that's a big problem if you are in a drought situation. So we also tested 24 hours or one window of 2 hours access to water, or 2 windows with 2-hour access to water. So we're handling the water shortage, but we are evaluating it both the effects on the milk production and the animal welfare. And this is how we like to find projects that sort of tie into more than one sustainability practice. And this, because of this, I feel that the students in our SustAinimal Academy are much better equipped when they graduate to handle the complexity of the world. Because you said you work in animal welfare, and I want to challenge a bit, because I've even come to a point where I say that we can't promote a new farming practice that is better for the animals if it is worse for the environment. You know, animal welfare cannot be an argument in itself. You need also to make sure that it's improving other sustainability factors. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Sigrid. Now I can see Professor Mahinda Attapattu has raised his hand. He is the person who introduced animal welfare to our faculty. So it's time, Professor Attapattu, to raise your question first.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
We
yes.
can-
Okay. Thank you, Professor Sigrid, for very informative and very clear presentation.
Thank you.
Now I have two questions, actually rather clarification request. First thing is that at one point you mentioned that some crop farmers are moving towards the forest farming, converting their crop plant into forest, kind of
So
kind of
I
a
lost
forest.
you a little bit. It was about fodder production at farms.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Forest farming,
Forest
converting.
farming, yes.
Yeah. So are there any government level incentives for that kind of conversion, or it comes from farmers self initiatives?
Well, if I turn the question around a bit, almost all dairy farmers in Sweden own both arable land and forestry land. And before industrialization of farming, the forests were used for grazing as a way to collect plant nutrients in the forests and bring them back to the farm to have a manure to put onto the fields. So before industrialization, farming needed 10 to 20 times as much grazing as they had farm fields to support that cropping with plant nutrients. Now, with the industrialization and the fossil fuel driven agriculture, we don't rely on that grazing anymore. So we don't have grazing in forests. But if there was a shortage, like we had a bad drought in 2018, then farmers wanted to let their animals into forests to graze. But it's difficult to put up fences in forests quickly. So that's one reason why we work with these virtual fences. That would be easier to let the cows out into forests. And there are byproducts from forestry that could be used as food for ruminants, but they have a higher value as a biofuel substrate today. So those side streams don't find the way into animal feed with the current market, but that could of course also change.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sigrid. The other clarification which I request that our agriculture students, undergraduates, they learn course called sustainable livestock productive systems, which we introduced maybe 10, 12 years ago. So in our classes, there are some debates. So yeah, in these debates, some students argue that the sustainability aspects cannot be applicable under Sri Lankan conditions, conditions like our part of the world, where our main concern should be on food production, not on the sustainability aspects. But whereas I think that countries like Sweden, which is one of the richest countries in the world. So those countries can think about the sustainability aspects of the production.
Yes.
Now my clarification which I request is that what are the government level or national level or regional level incentives or on the other hand legislatives that are aiming at making the livestock production systems or livestock products more sustainable?
Yes, it's a strong movement, and that's actually before we got this funding for SustAinimal, the only decision makers said the only thing they were interested in around farming was the negative effects on environment and climate. And it's quite easy if you say we want to cut greenhouse gas emissions in food production, then it's quite easy to say that we need to cut farming. If we stop farming, there won't be any greenhouse gas emissions, and that's great. Then Sweden will lower its geographical greenhouse gas emissions. So a lot of policy was directed on decreasing farming, and we still see that across Europe. In the European Union, that has been a big thing. But then a side effect will be that we produce less food. So what we want to put forward is to identify the farming methods that have the lowest negative footprint per meal of food for people. And then to take into account more than one factor at a time. Because if I'm only working with methane emissions, there are measures to take, for example, having a much more intensive production so that the maintenance requirements of the animals are diluted over more kilos of beef or more eggs or more meat or milk or whatever we produce. But if I do that, I won't have my animals out grazing. So then we will lose biodiversity, and that's an urgent threat. Within our lifetime, we will come to disasters in biodiversity. So this is what SustAinimal want to do, to make sure that we bring in also other factors so that more people understand the complexity of this, and that we can find for solutions that benefit several aspects: animal welfare, biodiversity, world hunger, and clean air. If we can find a method that improves all of those, then that is a way to go for the farms that can have those methods working. But we won't solve anything if we look at only one factor at a time, then we won't get anywhere.
So, Professor Sigrid, I will give the next chance to Professor Janak Vidanapatirana's question. He dropped his question in the chat box. How do the production of animal feed crops and human food crops compare in terms of their carbon and water footprints?
Yes, thank you for asking. Animal-derived foods have a much higher carbon footprint per meal than vegetable food has. However, if that analysis doesn't take into account what you could have done alternatively on that land, I don't see a lot of value in it. Because if you're comparing, if you have a farm field and you want to check how to make best use of it, then you can analyze with parameters from that farm field what the crop would be like and what inputs you would need to grow wheat or to grow lay for feeding sheep. And then you can see, so all the inputs and all the outputs, the net food production from this field with a production of sheep or a production of cereal grain. And that's a very relevant analysis. But when you compare what is already happening, so you take a farm that has beef and a farm that has a lot of wheat, and you do the math for the carbon footprint from the food from these two farms, that's it's not a fair comparison, because the farm that has animals today is often a farm where the combination of soil fertility and weather and rainfall makes it very reliable to grow wheat or rapeseed on that land. So therefore they have beef, because that's a way for them to make a living and to make sure that they have a produce to sell. So this is also something we're working on in SustAinimal. For example, in one of the publications I showed on the PowerPoint, to show that depending on which parameters you put into your analysis, you will get some answers that are really valuable and some that don't really translate into any actions at the farm level. Because if you're a farmer in the north of Sweden and someone says, oh, it would be much better for your carbon footprint to grow rapeseed than grass, and they're like, rapeseed doesn't grow here, you never get an harvest, so how can that be better? So we need to be specific. When it comes to the water footprint, it doesn't, I mean, you would need to go crop by crop. Now, if you're growing almonds, it has a high water footprint. Grazing animals in Northern Europe hardly have a water footprint, because most of the water used is rainfall that is caught by the crop when they're grazing, instead of just leaving the soil immediately. So that is more varied and specific to different crops. And we have, I'm not an expert in this, but we have a couple of really skilled like systems analysis colleagues working in SustAinimal that I'd be happy to put you in contact with if you want to ask more specific questions. So just send me an email and I'll forward your question to them.
All right, Professor Sigrid, next question from the chat box raised by Dr. Avanti. What are the steps which have been taken to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions due to farm animals and related activities in Sweden?
Yeah. So the main strength of Swedish farming when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions is that we have high yielding animals. So an average dairy cow in Sweden produces around 50 kilos of milk per day. And when you do the greenhouse gas calculations for those cows, the footprint per liter of milk is low, compared to if you have a lower yielding animal that uses more resources and has emissions for their maintenance that has a strong weight on the final carbon footprint. So I know that when carbon footprint on dairy, and it's similar with pork and chicken, when you compare with different countries, Sweden come out strong because it's intense. But then that intensity puts animals largely indoors, and they use a lot of crops that are predestined as animal food. So for example, the chicken production is relying completely on crops that are planted for animal feed. And on that land where you grow your chicken feed, you could probably have had a human food crop instead. So then it's like, yeah, it's very efficient, but is it efficient? You know, on the farm level, it's efficient. That farm gets a lot of chicken and can sell the chicken. And when the company who bought the chicken to make chicken McNuggets or something, when they calculate the carbon footprint, it's very low. But then if I say, well, this farm, you could have grown beans instead, and you could have eaten beans instead of chicken, and then beans would have been more efficient. So we have come far with efficiency, but we still have a lot of challenges at the systems level. But intensity is one big thing, and then we have the other big thing in Sweden when it comes to sustainability is that our farms have learned to farm with a very low dependency on antibiotics. So that is also something we really like to share with other countries. What you need to do in terms of animal welfare and biosecurity to avoid having to use antibiotics in your animal farming. But then there's also other things like to reduce waste in all steps, make sure that the animals are healthy, and that they live and produce. Animals that get a disease are not sustainable, because then they will use resources, but you don't get food from them. To have sustainable farming practices with a crop rotation that ensures that the farmland is healthy forever and ever, that you don't use the farmland in a way that it will eventually be unfertile. So it's difficult to answer quickly, but I think in Sweden and in so many other countries, a lot of really clever things have already been done, and it's down to academia to learn to see which practices are already super good and which need to be changed to contribute at the systems level in a better way.
Right. Thank you, Professor Sigrid. So the last question from me again. Based on your experience, could you please explain what kind of things we have to take into account when we are adopting such a collaborative model like SustAinimal in another country like Sri Lanka?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And I mean, this was a daunting task for me. I'm a very simple animal scientist, and I like other physiology, like mammary epithelial cells. That's my safe zone. But I came to a point where I realized, even if I know everything there is to know about milk synthesis, I won't make an impact at the systems level with only my physiology knowledge. So the first step is to be a group of people who know that they will need other scientists and other sciences to improve the system at the systems level. So you need to be a group of people who understand that my own knowledge is not sufficient. Because there's a lot of people out there they're so happy with their knowledge, and they may be at the forefront, and maybe they get Nobel Prizes, and we need those experts, and they have they're fully occupied with their expertise. But then there's also some of us who think that, oh, I need to know more. I'm an animal scientist, but I need to know much more about cropping and soil science to understand where we should have animal farms and where an animal farm is only a load to the system. So then I need to find crop scientists who are keen to work with the animal science questions, and I need economists. So you need to build a network of people who are interested in learning together. And then you need to identify actors across the food system. So it's not only scientists or only company owners, but that all of you meet and find some kind of funding where you can put work time during actual work hours into meeting, brainstorming, discussing, identifying knowledge gaps and bottlenecks, and then trying and design projects, whether it's a research project or some other kind of change project that can address those factors that you have identified as important, instead of all of us just doing business as usual. Because if we keep doing the same, we won't get a different output. You need a lot of patience, and you need to really be interested in people. And I think maybe you are better at that than what we are in Sweden. We have many Swedes live in single households, and we're not that interested in people. So that has been a big challenge for us, to understand each other and to enjoy each other, even if we have different opinions, and to really use that as a driver to learn together.
Right. So thank you very much, Professor Sigrid, for answering our questions very clearly. Now we are reaching towards the end of today's webinar. First and foremost, I would like to extend my gratitude to Professor Sigrid for accepting our invitation and making an eye-opening and very informative speech. Actually, you could bring all of us to Sweden for a short period of time. Thank you very much, Professor Sigrid, once again. And my special thanks should go to Dr. Hasita Priyashant. With his help, actually, we could find you, Professor Sigrid. So, Dr. Priyashant, please accept my sincere acknowledgement. Then, all participants are acknowledged, especially who contributed the plenary discussion by raising questions. So that helped to exchange our knowledge and make us aware of how collaborative research could help to have a sustainable food system all around the world. So lastly, but not least, I thank the coordinator and the team of International Symposium 2025, Faculty of Agriculture, University of Ruhuna. It's an annual event of our faculty for selecting me as the moderator of this webinar and those who have contributed in numerous ways to success this event. Thank you very much once again, all of you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Lakshita,
Thank
I
you.
think, okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Dazi. So, on behalf of the ISA 2025 Organizing Committee, so I extend my heartiest gratitude to Professor Sigrid Agnes for sharing her valuable insights on SustAinimal, a collaborative multi-actor research center studying the role of livestock for competitiveness and sustainability in future food systems. And we truly appreciate your time and expertise. Thank you very much, Professor. And
Thank
a
you.
special thank you for Professor Dasi Senrathan for expertly moderating today's session. And your contribution was invaluable in making this event success. To all our participants, thank you for joining us. We hope the session was insightful and beneficial. A big thank you also to everyone who worked behind the scenes to ensure a smooth event. Before we conclude, a quick reminder: e-certificates will be issued via the Lanka Education and Research Network through the Micro Rewards platform. Once ready, you will receive an email at the address provided during the registration. So our next step, the next pre-symposium webinar is scheduled for May 1st. So we encourage you to stay connected with us through our website and social media platforms and for updates and more details. So once again, thank you all and we look forward to meeting you again soon. So have a wonderful day, all of you. Thank you very much.
Bye.